Welcome. My name is Paolo Annino, and I'm FSU College of Law. And I'm very happy to be here today. We're doing a 6-part series on special education. We already talked about the goal of special education, which is a free and appropriate public education. That was part 1. Part 2, we talked about evaluations. And now we're going to talk about the document that embodies a free and appropriate public education. And that document is called the Individual Education Plan or Program, IEP. That's going to be the document that embodies a free and appropriate public education. So if I said to someone, show me the child's receiving a free and appropriate public education, they should hand over the IEP, Individual Education Plan, to me. Now the IEP then is going to be the key document to make sure the child gets a free and appropriate public education. Now, that document, I regret to say, is not uniform. So we have 67 school districts or more in Florida, and there's no uniformity on this document called the Individual Education Plan. And that's throughout the country. So there's going to be 5 parts, though, of this document that are key that I want to discuss today. The first part we've already mentioned in our previous section, and that part is called present level of performance. And that part is really so important because that part tells us where the child presently is. Now, where is it on the IEP? Sometimes it's in the back of the IEP, sometimes in the front of the IEP. There is no uniformity where you're going to locate present level of performance. But that's one of the first things you need to do when you're looking at an IEP is look at the present level of performance, because that will tell you where the present status of the child. Many present level of performance are written in technical language. That's a mistake. It should be lay people language that anyone should be able to understand. Specifically, what I look for when I read present level performance section, I want to know what grade level. For me, that's very important. I want to know what grade level is the child reading, what grade level is the child doing math in. I want to know behavioral levels. Okay, so it needs to be understandable. That's the key part. So the takeaway on this section is when this section is created, it needs to be an understandable section that you can tell a camp counselor the present status of the child. The next section is called goals. So every individual education plan has a section called goals. What are the educational goals for the child? Now, this is very important in order to make a successful individual education plan, that you have goals that are concrete, that are measurable, and goals that are you're concrete, measurable, and that they can be specified. So concrete, measurable, specified. So you can hold the school district accountable, and also you can hold the child accountable of where the child is meeting his or her goals. Part of this also, what I always add to this is the goals should be realistic. And let me talk about a case that I think does a very good job discussing goals. And that's a fairly recent case. Jefferson County, it's a federal court case, County School Board versus Litem. Federal District Court case in the 11th Circuit. In that case, and I think this is typical for many goals I've seen. In that case, the school district had a goal for the child that the child was going to read at the 9th grade level. So that was what the goal was. And that goal, I think, is concrete, it's specific, it's measurable, right? So it's concrete, specific, measurable. the child's going to read at a 9th grade level. But when we get to present level performance, the grade level, the child was reading in the 1st grade. So present level performance was 1st grade, but the goal was the child was going to read at the 9th grade level. How realistic is that? And the answer is it was not realistic. And the court said that if they wanted to make it realistic, what was required? Well, a variety of things. One would be is a surge of services, tutoring, a variety of services so the child can pull up his 1st grade reading level to a 9th grade. But that wasn't even provided to the child. So again, in that case, in Jefferson County versus Lolita, the court was really clear that the goal, because it was not realistic, was an inadequate goal and denied the child a free and appropriate public education. So it's important to create goals that are concrete, that are specific, measurable, right? Because you need to know, for example, sometimes I see goals that say the child will do better in reading. That's the goal. The child will do better in reading. What does that mean? The child will do better in reading. How specific is that? The child will do better in reading. That's meaningless. And it's important when we talk about the IEP document. The IEP document is not a public relations document. It's not a political document. It is an instrument that's going to provide a child a free and appropriate public education. So simply saying better in reading or better in math does not meet the requirements of a meaningful goal. Okay, so the present level performance, goals, the other part that I want to talk about, the other part I want to talk about is that, so every IEP has present level performance, has goals. The third part is program or placement. Program or placement. Program or placement means it's a bundle of instructional services that are intended for populations of children with disabilities. So there's a way of teaching children with autism that's different from teaching children with learning disabilities. So it's a type or program of services. And there are a number of programs of services for children with disabilities. And sometimes then the issue is, you could ask me, well, how do we determine the program? And really the answer for any question you ask me is always the same, evaluations, right? So the evaluations will help us determine which program is most appropriate for the child. And a very common problem occurs with programs is, say, with autism. Some school districts do not have a program for autism. And instead, they place their autistic kids in a program for children with intellectual disabilities. Again, not based on evaluations. And then the issue then is that the appropriate program for the child? So when we talk about challenging the individual education plan, we're really talking about not the whole plan. We're talking about challenging parts. So sometimes we're going to challenge the present level of performance. Many times we're going to challenge the goals. That the goals are just simply not concrete, not measurable, not specific, or realistic. Sometimes, though, we're going to say, school district, that's the wrong program. Based on the evaluations I have, this child, primary disability, does not belong in that program. Sometimes it's difficult to know what program the child belongs in because the child has multiple disabilities. And you have to try to determine, based on evaluations, what is the primary disability for the child. So these are three main parts of an individual education plan. The next part is called related services. Related services. Related services are any service at all that the child would benefit educationally from. So it is services in addition to the program. So it can be speech therapy, it can be physical therapy, it can be occupational therapy, it can be counseling, vision therapy, auditory therapy, you name it. And it can even be parent training. Some parent-related services, parent training can be a related service if it helps the child benefit from education. So when it comes to related services, there's a bunch of sub-issues that are really important that you be aware of. I remember a number of years ago, my center had a case where this child had a foster care child with a variety of emotional problems. We were trying to obtain counseling for the child, trying to obtain counseling. Counseling is what? It's a related service. So my students go to the individual education plan meeting and they do an ask, right? Or ask, right? And the ask for them, right? They're focusing on, this is what they wanted. They wanted a related service. They wanted counseling. And my students come back and they're very excited. Professor Nina, we were able to get counseling for the child. And the first thing I do, of course, is let me see the individual education plan, right? Let me see the plan. It's not a contract, but it's treated like a contract. So it's not a contract, but there has similarities to a contract. So I said, let me see the actual individual education plan. And I look under related services. Again, I want to stress this. I wish it wasn't this way, but there's no uniformity on these individual education plans. So this section on related services might be buried on page 50, okay? So you have to look for these 5 categories I'm talking about. So I find the section that deals with related service, because it says, the heading says related service. I go to that section and it says counseling. Then it has a parentheses, a parenthetical. Zero to 2 hours a week. So what did my students agree to? They agreed to 0 hours of counseling. It's very important that when we talk about related services, we talk about any of these parts that you are concrete, measurable, and specific. School districts are allowed to use a range, but and this is a perfect example where an advocate's got what I call sandbagged. They're allowed to use a range, but it is the bottom of the range that they are obligated to provide. So it's very important when we're talking about related services that, yes, they can use ranges. So, and that's a big issue, like counseling or like tutoring. Is it a half an hour tutoring a week or 3 hours of tutoring a week? That decision has to be made and before the IEP meeting so that you can make that ask and be specific enough so you just don't walk in saying, Sally needs tutoring. You need to say, Sally needs tutoring an hour a week, a half an hour a week, 3 hours a week. In addition to that, you also need to be able to be clear on, is it group tutoring or individual tutoring? Is it group speech therapy or individual speech therapy? That specificity is required so that you have a meaningful IEP. And if you don't specify, then you're deferring to the school district. We don't specify. So it's important for you to be able to specify what related service you're asking for, and also the frequency, and whether or not it's individual or group. And again, related services and program are going to be 2 of the main mechanisms for a child to achieve the goals. Okay. The next section here Number 5, which is important, is called least restrictive environment. Least restrictive environment. So every individual education plan has a section called least restrictive environment. Years ago, it used to be called mainstreaming. Now it's called often inclusion. Inclusion is a word that's often used nowadays. What that is that there's a requirement under federal law that these programs and related services are provided in the least restrictive environment so that the child can interact as much as the maximum possible with children with non-disabilities. Because the whole belief here, Congress's belief, is that the human condition is a condition that disabilities is a natural part of. So that children without disabilities can learn with children children with disabilities, and children with disabilities can learn from children without disabilities. It's a natural part of the human condition. And that's why there's a presumption. Sometimes it's called, I see in cases, cases talk about a preference. I think that's too weak. There's a presumption that all the services that are provided in the least restrictive environment for your child. And so sometimes what you're going to be contesting, you walk in, you're happy with the present level performance, you're happy with the goals, you're happy with the program, you're happy with the related services, but they want to put this kid in a segregated school where they don't encounter any children with non-disabilities. And that's going to be what you're contesting. And that's going to be what your ask is in the case. So it's really clear that you compartmentalize what exactly the issue is. So these are the five main components of every individual education plan. Again, they're not in any one order. They're difficult to read, but it is important for you to realize that these are what's required for you to obtain a free and appropriate public education. Yes, as to least restrictive environment, there is a recent case in the federal district. It's called A period, K period versus Winnett School District in the 11th Circuit. And in that case, I think it really typifies one aspect of least restrictive environment, and that is this. This was a child who is autistic child, and the child was on a very strict nutritional diet. So the child had to have these supplements, nutritional supplements, every 45 minutes. The parents in AK Winnett said, we do not believe that because of this nutritional diet that the child can be in a regular classroom, in a regular school. Rather, we need the child to be taught at home because of her nutritional needs of every 45 minutes. The court in that case said that doing that would deny a child the least restrictive environment, which is an environment of interacting with non-disabled children by really secluding the child at her home. The court also said that the school offered accommodations, that every 45 minutes she could go to get her nutritional supplements. So in that case was an example where the parent wanted to impose not the least restrictive environment. Sometimes the opposite is true. It's the school district wanting to impose a segregated environment that's not the least restrictive environment. So again, these are the five main components of the individual education plan that creates a free and appropriate public education. So now we talked about the five components of the individual education plan. Now I want to talk about the individual education plan, the team, it's called the IEP team, that creates this plan with these 5 components. There's a team, and it's very important that the emphasis is on the word team. The whole Federal Act repeatedly uses the word team. What does that mean? Well, that means that all the members of the IEP are equal. So there's no bosses or they're all equal. So everyone has an equal voice in the dialogue. Also, what it means is non-hierarchical, that there is no one who's going to give the last word. It is non-hierarchical. It's an equal process. It's an equal process to do what? To create consensus on what is a free and appropriate public education. And if I was in Congress and I was changing the law, the federal law, I would add an amendment that before the individual education plan meeting begins, everyone does a pledge that they focus on free and appropriate public education of the child. Rather than what? Rather than their monetary concerns, that, oh, we can't afford providing that service. Or egos, where parents and others are just upset with each other. So it's important to focus on the child, to focus on free and appropriate public education. So the team then consists of whom? It consists of a regular school teacher. You can say, well, wait a minute now, this is a special education kid. Why do we have a regular school teacher there? Well, because of least restrictive environment. You want to encourage the child to be in so-called regular classes. The special education teacher, someone from the school administration who can actually commit the school to certain fundings of these services. The parent has a right to be there. The child has a right to be there. I recommend that the child be at the individual education plan meeting, except if it's going to be traumatic. If you believe it's going to hurt the child to listen to this dialogue, then of course I don't recommend it. But if it's not going to be traumatic, then I do recommend it, because I think it creates a certain seriousness and it helps the team to focus on the child and what's free and appropriate public education for that child. Okay. In addition to what I said, the parents, many of our foster children don't have parents. So who represents the foster child if there's no parents? Like, say parental rights have been terminated, for example. Who does it? Well, in 2004, really a major change was made in the Individuals with Disability Education Act. And that major change was Congress mandated for foster children, now this was specifically for foster children, that either the foster care court, the state foster care court, shall, mandatory language, not like discretionary, shall appoint an educational surrogate for a foster child, or the school district shall appoint. So the way Congress set up the amendment is that either the trial court, foster care court, is to appoint an educational surrogate for every foster child, or the school district is required to appoint a educational surrogate who really steps into the shoes of the parent. Now, if this is a case, dependency case where there still is active parents, then yes, there's no right to a surrogate parent. In that sense, the child's biological or adoptive parents can provide the educational advocacy. So again, I do want to mention, though, for those who are going to be appointed, there's a Florida Rules of Juvenile Procedure. It's Rule 8.292. also Florida statutes 39.0016(3). So rules of juvenile procedure and the statute are real clear about that the state court judge shall appoint, and also that the school district shall appoint. So the child is covered by both ways. Okay, so I do want to talk about one member, about the parent especially. The way the Individual Disability Education Act is set up is that these members, the teacher, the school personnel, that these members are equal. But Congress really believed that it was important that the parent take a very active role in making sure the child receives a free and appropriate public education. So there's lots of notice requirements. The parents are to be notified. And there's a recent case from the 11th Circuit. Gotta find a place to right here. R.L. v. Miami-Dade, 11th Circuit decision, Fed 3rd, 757 Fed 3rd, 1173, 2014 decision. And in that case, what happened was the court talked about the school had a closed mind at the IEP meeting. And because they had a closed mind, they weren't listening to what the parents were saying. The law is really clear that the parents are relevant at the individual education plan meeting and that they are to be given full participation as equal members. Well, there's a problem now, right? Most of these children don't have parents. So who's going to be this full participant at the individual education plan meeting? Well, if the parent doesn't do it, it's the educational surrogate. It's the responsibility of the educational surrogate to provide this full participation. So to summarize this part we talked about the 5 components of the individual education plan. We talked about the individual education plan team meeting, about who the membership are, and we talked about that everyone is an equal partner. We also talked about surrogate parent or educational surrogates, and here's the authority for that in Florida, and that so every child who is in special education in Florida should have an educational surrogate. So as an advocate or as a guardian ad litem who's working with these children, one of the major points is to make sure that every child who's in special education has an educational surrogate. And so the next section we're going to talk about is how to actually prevail in getting your what you're asking for at the IEP meeting, how to actually conduct an individual education plan meeting. Thank you.